Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Hello, welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. This is David Parra. We have a very important show today. The subject is legislation, how bills become law. Again, welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. This is David Parra. The subject today is legislation, how bills become law. Very important subject. And let me introduce my guest. We have two guests today. One has not arrived. Hopefully she's doing fine and she'll be here in just a minute. Cynthia Aragon, thank you so much for joining our show today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, David.
And I understand that you work for the Arizona Legislature. You are a chief of staff for that entity. Is this correct?
Yes, that is correct. I work at the Arizona House of Representatives. So we have both chambers. I work with members or staff in both chambers, but my job is with the Arizona House of Representatives.
Perfect. I was just, I think I shared this with you before we went on the air, that very interesting, the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence for the United States took place in 1776, and the Constitution, which was a process in drafting and being ratified, happened around 1780, 1790, and here we are in 2018, two Latinos, or Latinx, whichever you want to call us, talking about this amazing issue and subject. I feel, I don't know, it just touches my being that we are talking about this matter. But it's just a testament of a lot of happenings, a lot of changes in our world. I don't know if you have any feelings about this, but it kind of touched me, that you and I and Lupe, hopefully she'll make it, we'll be talking about this for the next 60 minutes. Any thoughts on that?
No, and I welcome the invitation. I do love what I do, specifically because of that, right? The Constitution was made by the people and for the people, and my passion is empowerment and participation. So I'm very happy to hear what you do with AARP and this show, informing people, because participation is key, right? We can't have the democracy that we have without participation.
Yeah. And now we want to welcome Lupe Solis. Lupe, thank you so very much for making time. I know it's not an easy thing. The traffic is pretty bad, and you live 20, 30 miles from here. So thank you so much for joining Lupe. Lupe Solis, I call you a community advocate, but you work for the Governor's Council on Aging, wasn't it? And then for AARP some 10 years plus. So you've been around and you know your politics, you know your legislative process, your advocacy concepts, and we're just so happy and glad to have you. Welcome and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So again, we would like to use this few minutes to highlight the matter of the Constitution, right? Because when we talk about how bills become law, this wouldn't be possible if there weren't rules, right? And the rules and even the institutions of the entities that make the rules are in the Constitution. So we have to kind of go back to the Constitution. And in this Constitution, again, it was the Declaration of Independence, 1776, the U.S. Constitution, 1780, 1790 was ratified. It was a process. And pretty much in this Constitution, it was stipulated that there would be the three branches of government, right? At the federal level, you have the legislative, your executive, and then your judicial. And then there was another part of this main objective of the Constitution was also to basically the separation of powers. You know, the state should have powers, and then the federal, and who overrides what, and this and the other. And then you also have the protection of various individual liberties of American citizens. So when we talk about the Constitution, this is basically the three main functions of the Constitution. Again, to set up the federal government, the separation of powers between the state and the federal government, and the protection of individual liberties for American citizens.
Under the Bill of Rights.
Correct. And let's just talk a little bit about the bold experiment, because in the Declaration of Independence, the preamble of the Constitution, it says in order to make a more perfect union. So the founding fathers of this country, they took a bold, decision to establish these rules that they were going to be governed by in this newly formed nation. To me, that's unbelievable, because this has the background of monarchs and all kinds of different forms of government that it simply was not working out. So I suppose they learned about all the past and they came up with these concepts. Isn't this amazing, this experiment? To them it was an experiment, but now we have over 200 years of experience with the Constitution. Any thoughts on this beginning of the nation under the foundation of the Constitution?
Well, it certainly was a great idea. And as you said, based not only on, it was almost really entirely new concept for the world, but it did incorporate a lot of democratic ideals from Greek tradition, as well as you say, some from monarchies. But that was one thing they were trying to avoid, authoritarian rule. Right. And I think they did a wonderful job. And all things considered, it's not perfect in the actual leaving of it, but it certainly is almost perfect in writing.
Right.
And I think it was very important, as Lupe mentioned right now, the checks and balances.
Right.
And the thought of creating the three branches so that there would not be abuse. And I see it as it was a protection of the people, because the intention of the idea of creating our democracy, it was by the people and for the people. And how did you prevent abuse or the abuse of any specific position?
Right. So basically, obviously, in this whole process, and we're not addressing the U.S. Constitution today, we want to talk about how bills become law, but I think it's a given that we have to at least say a little something about the Constitution. But there was the issue of what powers are going to be given to the states, right? Because there was too much power given to the federal government, and then the debate was there that, hey, how about the states? We don't want to make the federal government too powerful, and then how about the states? So that was the check and balances also in terms of the state and the federal, but also between the three branches of government, that there are some check and balances inscribed in the Constitution so that not one branch will do whatever they want, right? And it's very interesting that, for instance, the president assigns the judges, but then Congress has to what? Has to, what's the right term there? Has to approve? Approve, right? So there's this interdependency of the three branches, definitely, the checks and balances, and above all, the protection of the individual liberties. So these are just the general concepts of the U.S. Constitution as a new experiment 200 plus years ago that this man got together, and I say men because I think then it was just men, right? Regrettably. And so now that's what we have today. So let's see. Let's move forward just a little bit more. I would like to ask you if we can think of a case where all three branches of government basically participated and how it shows that they are interrelated. So again, checks and balances, right? And what came to mind is the Affordable Care Act. Would you like to engage in just briefly how the Affordable Care Act shows the three branches of government interacting with one another with what became known as the Obamacare? Would you mind?
Well, basically, almost any law that passes in this country, and in the state for that matter, is initiated by either the Congress or the legislature at whomever's request. It could be, there's some laws that are enacted by executive order, but they're few and far between sometimes. But right now, I think you mentioned the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. And yes, it was proposed by Congress, as you know, initiated I believe in the House and then approved by the Senate, and then eventually sent to the President, who then signs and says
So
yes.
now we have the two branches there. The legislative branches was legislating, basically coming up with the bills and passing this.
Right.
He was sent to the executive branch, which is the President. He
Right.
signs it, and then what happens?
Not all bills originate at the House, but for the most part,
Well, and I think it's important to mention, because at the House is the same way, right? It will pass to the House, Senate, and go to the governor. But at the federal level, it is not rare that either the governor, the executive branch, has influence to present some ideas forward. And we know in that case, it was President working closely with legislative staff to develop that, right? With legislators and Congress people, same way as it happens in the state at the federal level.
then in the implementation, as you know, states ran into problems, and some of them try to say, well, we don't like this law.
So they sue the federal
So
government.
they sued the federal
Some 20
government.
plus states, if I'm not mistaken.
And when it carried forth, as you say, then the third level gets
there you
engaged,
go.
because here comes the Supreme Court.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love this case, not necessarily because, whatever people may think about the Affordable Care Act, that's beside the point. I think what we're trying to highlight is the fact that the three branches of government are interrelated.
They have a
In this
role.
particular case, there was checks and balances, right? And so then the Supreme Court came in. If I remember right, it was the individual mandate that people had issues with, and then forcing the states to expand Medicaid.
Yes.
What do you recall what happened with the Supreme Court, how they ruled?
Well, as far as I know, they said it's a mandate and it will stay.
Right.
It's approved
to the individuals.
to the individuals, and
The state
the
was
state was
optional.
optional.
Optional, correct.
The state is
Yeah.
optional. Arizona did choose to go with the Medicaid expansion, if you recall.
Yeah, and now, Cindy, I know you work for the Arizona legislature, and you got to see that, or at least are familiar with the concept coming to the state, but again, the branches being interrelated. Would you mind relating what you saw there?
Right, and for Medicaid expansion, we saw something very similar that happened at the federal level, happened in the state. At that time, Governor Brewer was working with legislators to pass the expansion that would help thousands and thousands of people, primarily adults without children. But there was a lot of disagreement. It was a very politically charged issue. So there was a coalition of Republicans and Democrats that worked with the governor to pass the
To move it
the
forward.
legislation. At that point, there needed to be some funding for it to be able to happen and draw down federal monies for it. So the hospitals were also involved in contributing a piece because they benefit from it. But then a group of legislators said, no, that wasn't right. We were not all included. We needed a majority, a supermajority, so we're going to sue. So they filed
Because
a
the bad
lawsuit.
tax, the bad tax was, as far as the legislators were concerned, was a tax.
They were saying it's a tax,
No,
and
no.
therefore we need
I
more.
remember that.
So it went to courts, and it's not to, I believe Governor Brewer was not in office anymore when it was decided by the courts that it was legal, that it could stay in place. But that goes also to show that it could have passed, be in effect, and had the courts determined something else, it would have been undone.
Right. So again, both at the federal level and at the state level, we see this interdependence and interworking of the three branches of government.
Very definitely.
And that is basically the point that we're trying to make before we go into the nitty-gritty
Yeah.
of how bills become law, more in the technical side, and with the intention of showing that any person basically, or actually every person, needs to be engaged in this process, and it's not something far away. I think is very accessible. We just need to understand how it works so that we're able to participate. And of course, so this is again the inner working of the three branches of government. And we're not going to get into all the details about what functions are for the Congress and then for the executive branch and for the, judicial. We kind of understand those. Maybe one day we'll focus on that. But another power that the president has, the executive branch, is to grant pardons, right, to pardon people. But then there's also the issue of executive orders. So that is a power the president has. And let's just kind of, as an example, mention perhaps two of those, if you don't mind. Maybe the travel ban was one, very controversial one, and then the DACA, right? DACA both from the side of President Obama, to grant it, and then President Trump to undo it. So just any brief comments on that, because that is another, it's not necessarily a law per se, but there is a certain amount of power involved in deciding from the president in this case.
Every president has priorities, right? That's why voting is so important. Every president has priorities that they'll bring forward. There are things that have to be done through legislation. There are things that happen within the agencies and how things are implemented. And those touch us every day. It could be how Social Security Office is going to do something, or how Medicare is going to function in some way. In the cases that you mentioned of DACA, we saw President Obama signed that executive order allowing minors that came to the U.S. To have a work permit. Mm-hmm. And then we saw President Trump said no. So that is in the courts currently. Yes. But those, again, they go to the priorities and the powers of the executive branch.
Right. Okay. So again, we're just we want to land eventually in the how bills become law, and we're just kind of reviewing, the powers and the balance of powers. And it's very important to understand these things, because a lot of times if we don't understand them, first of all, we kind of get confused and we don't engage. Mm-hmm. And second, you get mad. Sometimes you get mad because you
don't understand how it happened.
We don't understand, right. And we just kind of go by our feelings. So,
I think it's important to remember, too, that even as laws are passed, ultimately the implementation depends on usually rules and regulations, and most people don't follow that. They fail to see the importance of making sure that the rules and regulations that are implemented go according to the spirit of the law, because sometimes they can be misinterpreted even by departments.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. So now going to the issues of how bills become law. I think this is very important because, see, whether we like it or not, most of what happens in the country, I think we can say that it was the issue or the result of some legislation somewhere, either at the state level or at the federal level. So legislation is an amazingly important thing. So now let's go to the very basics. So legislation, a bill. I mean, we call a bill a potential, an idea.
It's an idea.
It's an idea. Now, where can an idea come from?
It can come from any number of places, but it must be initiated by it must be introduced at the legislature. It could be somebody who's experiencing a problem and has the ear of a legislator and says, this is a problem and it's a major problem and I'm going to need you to do something about it. It could be a number of legislators recognizing an area of law that either needs amendment or needs initiation and introducing a bill, an idea again. But it could also be something that sometimes happens, and it's easy to see when you see the type of introductory sentence that you've got, introduced by, and it might say by request. And sometimes that means really that somebody came to you that you couldn't deny, that you couldn't say no to, and you developed it, but you're not really ready to fight for it. So there's many different ways, but ideas may be implementing new rules or new ideas, or it could be amending something in the law that's already written but is not working well.
So it's going to come from constituents. It's going to come from, right now, when people are running for office and knocking on doors, they're having conversations. So it can come from an idea from there. It can come from as a problem, as Lupe mentioned it, but also from advocacy organizations, right? Mm-hmm. For example, AARP, you are very in tune to what's affecting our seniors. in what's going on, that something that needs to be changed, or resources that are necessary for some specific issue. So therefore, you can bring forward advocacy groups can bring forward the ideas. Also, lobbyists. We have corporations that they're going to have lobbyists can be for corporations or nonprofit organizations, but those are also a big source of ideas.
Okay, so this is the source of an idea. It can come, again, lobbyists, it can come from organizations, it can come from constituents.
Everyone.
So, but that makes it to the legislature, and then somebody has to draft it, right? Because an idea has to be drafted. So are there professionals, are there staff members that have to draft that idea in terms that is more legal? Quote unquote?
Yes. So a member is going to have an idea, or says to staff, there's policy advisors, there's research, there's leg counsel who's going to put it in the legal format, because we have to make sure. So you can say, I want to make sure that everybody, I don't know, gets a house. Well, how's that going to happen? How is that going to be funded?
Right.
Who is it going to? There's a lot of questions that have to be asked to figure out where is it going to go into our statutes.
And David, I think that it's important also for people to understand the makeup of the legislature, because oftentimes you'll ask somebody, do you know what district you live in? And they have no idea that Arizona is divided into 30 legislative districts, which carry 2 representatives and 1 senator per district. So the total number of our legislature is 90 members. Okay? And so it's important for them to realize the power that the vote has in terms of making sure something happens or not. I was just this morning reviewing, for example, the initiatives that are proposed for our next election, and I was astounded that the one in particular lost by 104 votes. 104 statewide votes.
Wow.
That's and they've lost by less than that. So when people say to you, it doesn't matter if I vote or not, please say, yes, it does.
We have to go on a short break. Stay with us. You're listening to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, legislation, how bills become law. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. A very important subject today, legislation, how bills become law. I have to say that before I started working for AARP 15 years ago, this would have been a totally foreign language to me. And, legislation, advocacy, bills, and the branches of governments and balance of powers and all that. So it does take a little bit of time and interest and to kind of learn a few things about this process. And a lot of times, regrettably, life is not so easy, so we have to put bread on the table, and we're all running around in our jobs, and sometimes we come home all tired, and the least thing you want is to devote some time, and you just want to be entertained. But I think this is so critical that I don't know how we're going to do it, but we have to do it. I think it's honestly one of the most important things in our lives as citizens of a country. To participate in civic engagement, in voting, and following, doing the follow-up of what laws are being proposed or bills and what laws are passing, and somehow being part of the process. Is that your feeling to it? I have to believe that sometimes it gets a little frustrating when you would like to see more participation and you just don't see it. Any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly as an advocate that I've spent most of my life doing, it is frustrating. It is frustrating when people demonstrate no interest at all in something that it's going to affect them deeply. But sometimes it's just, like you say, a case of inertia. They just, their lives are busy, or they are not interested in what they consider politics. But I always tell people, all politics is local. And policy is the result of the possible, not the impossible. So you start somewhere and make it better when you can. And so I think as an advocacy organization, AARP is very, very well organized and versed in how to proceed to get people involved in the process. And that's what's essential. People must become and realize, especially in contentious issues or areas or years, which we've had all along, it's very important that people do not discount their vote.
Right.
And David, I think it's important for people to realize we cannot put our democracy on automatic pilot. We have to be participant. And it can be overwhelming, but if we start somewhere, just get involved in one thing, and from there, everything is so interrelated that you are going to learn how is it connected. Even about your trash. You want your trash picked up? Well, do you know how much money the city is getting from the state, or are they getting any money? Are your lights in your streets, or repairs to your streets or highways? All of those things are interrelated. So just starting somewhere, just get started, jump in. One thing will lead to another.
Yeah, perfect. So let's go back to this matter of a bill becoming a law. So it's an idea, and the sources could be several. It comes to the legislature. At the legislature, somebody has to write it. And one thing that I would like to highlight, or us to highlight, is the power that an individual within the system has to determine what bills goes through, because a lot of times I believe this is not highlighted enough. Can you explain that aspect of it? Who is that individual that has such a critical position that can decide what bills go and what bills do not? In other words, move to committee, for example.
Well, the move to committee comes after it's been numbered. If it hasn't been given a number in the hopper, it's not going to go anywhere, because that, by definition, is usually the job of the majority leader. You know, who's in power at the time has the power to determine what goes forth and what does not. And as a result, sometimes we see that bills introduced by members of a particular party will see no progress for years, because the party in power has that ability to hold back, to not assign to committee, to assign to 3 or 4 committees where they think somebody is going to be looking over their shoulders and saying, why didn't this pass? Well, if I assign a bill on health to the Committee on Transportation and to the Committee on Ways and Means, and it also has to go through budget, well, guess what? That bill's probably not going anywhere. So, yes, you're right. The process has its imbalances, if you will, but that's the way life is.
And we talk about what people can do and the influence that they can have, because the system is also designed for people to be able to participate. So if the speaker majority or the majority leader are not assigning a bill, so say AARP had this great idea, there's something that our senior citizens need, then the bill, a member either in the House or the Senate has this bill, the legislation looks great, and it was dropped, now is a bill. The measure is available to be put in a committee. You can advocate and reach out to them to put it into the right committee, as Lucas said. But then once it's put into a committee, it has been assigned to a committee, it is the power of the chair of that committee whether that bill gets heard or not. So there is another space in which people can intervene and influence by calling the representative, the chairman of the committee or chairwoman of the committee, and say, please hear so-and-so bill. Please hear so-and-so bill. It's important to me because of 1, 2, 3.
So an idea came. It came from different sources. It got written down. Then it's assigned, you said, Lupus, assigned to a committee.
A committee. Usually, the committee of reference is whatever topic it happens to be.
Who does the assigning to committees?
It's going to be the speaker and the majority leader.
So the Speaker of the House, majority leader in the Senate?
No, it can be the speaker and the majority leader. So we have, in the House, we have the speaker, the majority leader, and the majority whip. Okay. We have the minority leader, the minority assistant leader, and the minority whip. Okay. In the Senate, we have the president, the majority leader, and the whip. And in the minority, we have the minority leader, assistant, and whip.
So those different persons do they do it individually, or they have to come together to do the assigning?
Different administrations work differently. It depends on how they are going to do it. It's usually the Speaker's office with the majority leader. But a lot of the power comes from the President and the Speaker, and that determines how things are going to be run.
The President and the Speaker have lots of power.
Yes.
So the lobbying, where does the lobbying comes to? To who? Do they lobby the Speaker? Do they lobby the President? Who else do they? Or once the bill has been assigned to a committee, there's also an opportunity to lobby there. Where does the lobbying take place?
Well, it can take place at all places, but ordinarily and for advocacy, an effective way is to lobby the members of the committee that it was assigned to, because those are the people that are going to determine whether that bill moves forward to the floor or not. But of course, you can also lobby your personal representative to do what he or she can to influence the Speaker, the whip, the majority leader, and the committee chair. And it's very important that at all levels there be opinions expressed as to whether something should go forward or whether it should be stopped, because it can be the case can be both ways.
And if you ever have the person ever has any question, where is this stuck? Who's holding it? Because there are administrations that might not even put it into a committee, but for the most part, they usually do. But if you have any questions like who, just either call staff or call the representative that sponsor the legislation. They'll tell you this is what's holding it. This is where we can apply some. It will be useful for the representatives to hear from the community.
Okay, so where does, I'm sorry to ask these questions, but where is the powerful and the money comes into this process of lobbying? Why do people pay to lobby? And where is the money, what part of does money play into all this, and power from corporations or what have you? So they basically have, they hire lobbies, they pay them to come and lobby that person who is basically a decision maker on a particular bill?
Definitely, and the lobbyist is really nothing other than a specialized representative of whatever organization they're representing. It could be an advocacy network, it could be Children's Action Alliance, it could be the Restaurant Association, and as you well know, if I have a business and I'm a member of that organization and I've proposed a bill, a measure, or I don't like something that's in the books and I want to get rid of it, it's to my advantage to pay somebody who can dedicate almost full time to following where that bill is, what it's doing, where it's moving, where the pressure should be exerted, all those things. That's the lobbyist's job. And it is
in a positive sense.
In a very positive sense. They're usually very well versed in what they do. They know the law. They have integrity, or they should have integrity for the most part. And I would say my experience with them has been always positive in the sense that very few of them would deny the role and responsibility of their profession to satisfy something. They're paid to do what they're paid to do, and they do it well.
Good.
And that's where money comes, right? Is the resources, who has the money and the resources to hire somebody full-time to be out there advocating for their issue? The other piece that comes in, where money comes into play, is contributions to elections. The lobbyists or the associations, where are they donating money to what candidates? That is not supposed to influence votes. Legislators are not allowed to take any contributions from lobbyists during session, but that happens either before or after session. But also, our community has a great power that is their vote and their voice. We are used to the legislature. We mostly hear from paid lobbyists, right? It's the same faces that we see over and over and over representing multiple people or representing one association. But what we have seen, especially this past session, is the power of a personal story. When there's something that people care about and they go and speak to that, and then they are speaking to the representatives that they elected, that is huge.
Now, I do have this concept, and I learned a lot from Lupe. There is, and obviously I'm sure you both are very familiar with this concept, that in many instances the legislatures know very little of bills. And unless we educate, unless the public educates it, or lobbyists or whoever wants to go there to educate, they literally are going to be signing bills that perhaps understand very little of.
And yet, Well, and just to point in a few of the numbers from this previous session, is we had 1,329 measures introduced.
In Arizona?
Yes. Those are House and Senate bills. Of those 28, there's 28 memorials and resolutions, so they're really not laws, but they're like postcards to Congress or a statement that the legislature is trying to make. Of those 1,329, 369 were sent to the governor. So of that, it's very small. Then 285 were signed. So of the 369 that were sent to him, 285 were signed, and he vetoed 23 of those.
So what does that point to? To the quantity of bills, complexity, no time to do all that, or what does that point to?
It's both, right? Is the time, is the issues, and it's the politics. So we are going to have issues that maybe the chairs don't want to touch. They might be too political, and they don't want to talk about that. They're not going to hear, so they're not going to send to him.
Yeah.
Or they're planning to take care of it next session.
Yeah, we're going to have to go on our last break. Stay with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, and I am just so happy. Even though we have had some technical difficulties with Facebook, the radio signal has been going on very normal. We'll see what we'll do to edit this and kind of piece it together so that folks don't miss anything. I just really like the fact that we are addressing this, and I know I kind of like it. I think we need to do more shows on this process.
You're
because
political.
You think so, Lupe?
You are. You've become.
Maybe I have become. Okay, so again, the idea comes, a bill is drafted, there's an assigning of bills, there's all kinds of lobbying taking place. Then there's this window of opportunity to lobby and educate legislators. So some entities decide to hire and pay a lobbyist to do that job. So do we see, Lupe, in your experience, do we see just the regular folks lobbying, or you don't see as much? And what would be the process to do it?
Well, usually when people are interested in something, they find an organization to belong to.
Okay.
That organization usually does the strategizing of how we're going to impact this issue. And yes, I think you mentioned before the importance of personal stories. You know, how does this affect me and my family? What happened because we didn't have these? Or what happened because we had this law? And so, yes, there is a very definite way for people to be inserted into the system, into the process of developing a law or passing a law. But also, you have to remember that lobbyists are paid to do that, so they're a 24-hour job. Individuals who work, and we're busy with
life
issues, and so it's harder.
So you said the one way would be to basically associate themselves with an organization that is basically advocating for that one thing that they like, and that would be basically because that organization will do most of the job, and then they'll just join that effort. Would that be like the preferred way?
Well, I call it a strategy.
Strategy.
The organization decides, okay, where does the pressure need to be? How do we effect it? They usually don't have the same amount of money that a private or a corporate world has, but they're pretty effective. In the past, I've seen small things really happen. We saw that with predatory lending in 2008.
Of course.
As you know, the defeat of something that wasn't expected. They spent $50 million in that campaign.
Right.
But there's some organizations that do great work, but in joining those organizations is for you to stay informed on what's going on. When you receive an email from that organization saying, you need to call so-and-so, or you need to go this day to this hearing, or we need you to testify, please respond, because those are necessary. Also, people can testify in committee in person, or they can also do it from the comfort of their house. So there is a request to speak system.
Request to speak system.
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the account has to be created there
At the
at the
Capitol.
legislature at the Capitol.
Okay.
But then you only create the account, and then you'll be able to do it from home. So you basically log in. You can be watching the committee from home. So they're always live.
And this, okay, repeat that, because sometimes we miss that. Do you mean that all what is televised or broadcasted? Everything?
Every single committee is required by law to be public.
See,
So
that I
if-
did not know.
So whatever committee they're in, or if they're on the floor debating something, it's always televised.
Wow.
So if you create your account and you're watching a committee hearing, you can also just put on there, I oppose it because of this, or I support it because of this. You don't even have, you can just do it from the comfort of your home. Those are important because the representatives that are voting in that committee can see, they all have access of who has signed in support or opposition.
Even on the floor, they have their computers open
Yes.
and they're seeing what the process is.
You know, I just wonder if there is an organization that would take it upon themselves to acleg.gov. It's a great page to go to. That's where the Arizona legislature, and that's where all these things take place. But I just wonder if there would be something apart from that an individual, an organization would basically be narrating
What's going on.
in real time what's going on at the legislature. I'm probably giving an idea to somebody out there. Maybe it's going to be me when I retire. But in real time, narrating what's going on so that at least people have the opportunity to tune into that venue or platform and know exactly what's going on. Let's move a little bit you were going to say something.
Just
by all
before you
means.
go on to
Yes.
the next issue, I think it's very important for people to understand that every single year, so the pieces of legislation are different for the most part. They sometimes repeat them. But the one thing that the legislature is mandated by the Constitution to do every single year is to pass a budget.
Okay.
Now, the budget, it's not something that is introduced at the beginning of session. And just to clarify also for listeners, is the Arizona legislature is a part-time legislature. In other states, sometimes they're full-time. Here, we go into session and we start the second Monday of January.
Okay.
And by Constitution says we have to be done by 100 days, which usually never happens and is usually extended. The goal is always you have to have a new budget by June 30th because the new fiscal year starts on July 1st. So a budget always has to be passed, but that's not a regular bill that starts at the beginning of session. That's where the influence and the advocacy happens, because those move very fast. Sometimes we see a budget bill is introduced one day, and then the next day it's being voted on at the middle of the night.
Yeah. Before we finish and move to another issue that I wanted to briefly touch, what would you say to that individual that says, oh, too complicated, I just don't have the time, I already have a headache? What would you say to them? Because it is kind of complex. Where would we start?
Just if going on the budget, the resources, that the budget determines the resources that go to the school, the teachers, your kids. It pays for the transportation and how the streets are, the conditions of the streets in your neighborhood. It might have an influence of how much money is going to the city. Therefore, it can influence the number of law enforcement officers that we can have in our highways. It influences every single piece of our lives, even if we don't pay attention to it.
So you're saying that the budget could be an area that we could start and that is very important?
And covers everything.
Definitely, but almost anything that has affected your life.
Of
okay,
course.
We spoke earlier about what's happening. When you go to a town and the streets are full of holes. Well, that comes because there isn't enough funding, and it is the city's responsibility, but the city ultimately gets its funding either from state or federal. So again, that's your intervention. Are you interested in the education of your children, in the well-being of your elderly parent in a nursing home? Are you interested? You find the place that will work according to what your interest is.
Got it.
They're trusted organizations. You become involved with them. You probably cannot afford or will be able to learn the whole process or understand everything that's going on, but you really do come a long ways in understanding what's going on just by staying abreast of what's happening in a certain area through an organization. And I'm thinking of the Alzheimer's Association. I'm thinking
AARP, of course.
AARP, of course. You know, just any number. The Children's Action Alliance, any number of them. The Advocacy Network out there, PAFCO, you know, just a lot of very, very well forth following organizations.
Right.
And when people are tired and don't want to do something, just remember the budget reflects the priorities of the state. So if you are not looking, you don't know if your priorities are being represented.
Before we finish the show, we have about 3 minutes. You know, we saw that at the federal level, there's a legislation that takes place, and then the president has this power to executive orders and so on. At the state level, we have this concept of propositions, ballot initiatives. What is that? Can we address what is a proposition? How does a proposition happen?
Proposition is a proposal by someone who has determined that something either needs to be changed or needs to be introduced. And usually it's a public effort. That is totally
the legislative process?
No, it does not go through the legislative process until it's ready to be part of an election. But there are very definite rules that are enacted or maintained or regulated by the Secretary of State's office. And they will tell you, for example, how many, and the proposition does not become an initiative until it has been certified that it has enough votes from the public.
So proposition and initiative is two faces of the same thing?
The same thing.
Yes, and this, we have to mention that the Constitution of the state was very big on giving citizens the right to bring forward, collect signatures. That's something that the citizens are saying, okay, we need a big group of us to get together to put forward this idea, and then they put forward a proposition.
Even to, quote-unquote, veto a law?
So that will be a referendum. So then the legislature has the right to say, okay, we're going to put this on the ballot for voters to say yes or no. But also, if there's a law the citizens don't like, they can within 90 days collect signatures to put it back on the ballot and either get it approved or get rid of it.
And if it gets approved, does that automatically undo the law, or
no,
that tells the legislator to legislate some more?
No, it goes to a vote at an election, and then if it passes, then the legislature must abide by that passage.
So it gets rid of it.
Then gets rid of it.
So they have no choice after that but to
basically
listen to the people.
Again, power is might, right? And in recent years, what we've seen is that the number of signatures and the deadlines to collect those signatures have been tightened. And the reason for it is that Arizona has been pretty good about enacting its citizens. The citizens have been really good about saying, no, I don't like this, or I need this, or whatever. And so the more initiatives there are, the more the legislature feels constrained by that ability of the citizen to say yay or nay to something.
Final thoughts, 10 seconds.
Participate. Get involved in whatever way you can and vote.
And we will continue to do our best to educate and provide as much information, of course.
And thank you for what you're doing in AARP.
Thank you. You're welcome. Lupe, 10 seconds.
Well, of course, I think AARP is wonderful. I've been a part of it for 10 years. But definitely, what we consider, if we consider that our vote doesn't count, that means that we are undervaluing our strength as a person that has a right to participate in this process, and it is extremely important. Things have been lost by as little as 10 votes.
Amazing.
So, extremely important.
Go. Thank you, Lupe. Thank you, Cynthia. It's been a pleasure doing this show together. And thank you for joining today. This was AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Join us next week. Have a great day.